check it out. Good. Good work. Yeah, great.
I was going to mention.
That this committee is approaching its one-year anniversary. It's notoriously challenging to mount an effort like this one, but you truly have hit the road running. We have gained momentum since then. The excellent discussions, research, and efforts to improve our understanding of the problems with the current process we have seen from the subcommittees over the last few months speaks both to your dedication and the importance of your work, and I'd like to personally thank you for the work that you're doing. You know, I was moved away from what now looks like a cushy job in New York to become the Archivist of the United States on the promise and belief that the National Archives could play an important role in the Open Government Initiative. And I have worked very hard in those 5 years, especially with my colleagues from the Open Government community, to not only get the records out and available, but to use all of our resources, including OGIS and ISU and the Public Declassification Information Board, to focus on ways that we can improve access to the federal records. So I'm a huge fan of your work, and you have my commitment for support of the work that you're doing to improve access for the American public. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time from your own lives to help the government in this work. You have my deep appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I wish I could stay, but I don't know.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for the 4th meeting of the FOIA Advisory Committee. I know you all join me in thanking the National Archives and Records Administration for being the host agency for the committee, and I want to thank our archivist who provided us the opening remarks. As I mentioned at our previous meeting, I am Nikki Gramian, the Deputy Director of OGIS, and I have a brief update on the committee membership. As you all know, Mr. David Reed has stepped down from the committee, and his co-chair for the Proactive Disclosure Subcommittee will be joining us by phone, I believe, the latter half of the meeting, Mr. Gillespie. I wanted to thank Mr. Reed for his services to the committee. And the government replacement, the archivist has appointed Mr. David Pritzker. Mr. Pritzker is the Deputy General Counsel for the Administrative Conference of the United States, ACUS. He brings to the FOIA Advisory Committee 40 years of experience as a federal agency attorney, specializing in administrative law, including FOIA. He has extensive experience in regulation, alternative dispute resolution, and advisory committee processes. Please join me to welcome David. We're very glad you're here.
I'm delighted to be here. Or rather, I'm delighted to be in this seat instead of that seat.
Well, we're delighted you're in that seat as well. We would like to spend the next few minutes introducing the members who are around the table and also on the phone. As a reminder, the committee members' bios are all available on our committee's webpage, which is available at www.ogis.archives.gov. We are videotaping this meeting, and we'll make the video and transcripts and the meeting material available on the committee's webpage. For the record, it will help if you can remember to identify yourself by name and affiliation when you speak. And I will be reminding you guys. Committee members Karen Finnegan and Maggie Mulvihill are unable to join us today due to previous commitment. Eric Gillespie also is going to join us again by phone.
And Maggie may call in later.
Maggie may also call in. That's great. We'll look forward to seeing the other two folks hopefully at our next meeting in July. So let us start with the members who are on the telephone. If I could ask them to introduce themselves. Did you do the call?
Yeah, yes, it's connected.
Did anyone
There's
call
just
it?
nobody on.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So we'll just start with going around the table. If I could start with.
I'm Lee White, Executive Director of the National Coalition for History.
Melanie State Director of OIP and Justice.
David Pritzker, Deputy General Counsel of the Administrative Conference of the U.S.
Ginger McCall, Electronic Privacy Information Center.
Brent, the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Ann Wiseman, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington.
Nate Jones, National Security Archive.
Jim Hogan, Department of Defense, Director for Oversight and Compliance.
Dolores Barber, Deputy Chief FOIA Officer, Department of Homeland Security.
Mark Zaid, Private Practitioner and the Executive Director of the James Madison Project.
David Bauer, Private Attorney representing the requester community.
Martin Michalowski, the FOIA Manager at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Thank you all. Let me also introduce the members of the OGIS staff who are really the life support for the committee's operations. Crystal Lemelin, as you all know, is our designated federal officer for this advisory committee. I have Amy Bennett, who kindly has agreed to take notes for today, and our newest member of OGIS's family is Hirsch Kravitz, who is our attorney. I also have Angel Simmons, who is also present here. Okay, so before we dive into the work we're about to do, I wanted to share some details on how today's meeting will work and also cover some basic expectations and ground rules for our session. First thing is we will take about 15 minutes break halfway through this meeting at approximately 11:15 to 11:20. While we are not allowed to have any food or drinks in this room, you may wish to grab something quickly from the Charters Cafe, located 2 levels down on the ground floor, which is also where the restrooms are located. All of the information about this committee is maintained on our webpage within the OGIS website, www.ogis.archives.gov. And you can also find the committee's charter, everyone's information, committee's members, link to our videos, transcripts for all of these meetings, information about meeting dates, public comments, and anything else that's related to the work of this committee. We will meet up to 4 times per year. Today's meeting agenda and OGIS Notices website lists all the dates for the upcoming meetings. We selected Tuesday of the third week of the month unless the date conflicted with a holiday. During our inaugural meeting, we established 3 subcommittees: the subcommittees on FOIA oversight and accountability, the subcommittee on proactive disclosure, and also the subcommittee on FOIA fees. These subcommittees are free to schedule meetings in addition to this larger committee meeting. The same FOIA rules apply for the subcommittee meetings, and we can expect to see a notice of those meetings, and that they should be open to the public as well. Subcommittee documents are also available on our website. So today we are expecting to hear some updates from these subcommittees. There's a committee on freedom of information. We want our work to be as open and transparent as possible. We're again glad to see so many interested folks in this room, and we want all of you guys to be part of the committee as much as possible. So with that said, I'm going to be, we just talked about the meeting minutes of January 27th with our newest member, Mr. Pritzker. These meetings were emailed to everyone, I believe. Everyone had a chance to read.
You also have a copy in front of them. Those of you at the table have a copy in front of you right now. And Mr. Pritzker called to our attention that we inaccurately described Section 508.
Yes.
So he proposes that we amend the record to have a more accurate and correct and factual description. Thank you, Mr. Pritzker, for bringing that to our attention.
Therefore, if you all don't mind, we would like to make those corrections and then have it at our next meeting with both last minutes as well as for this meeting's minutes, and we'll vote on them next time. We are now going to start with the subcommittee reports. Let's start with oversight and accountability, if I may. You will have about 30 minutes with the subcommittee of oversight and accountability, including we will include a report of where the work stands and any discussions or brainstorming if you all would like. Subcommittee on oversight and accountability.
All right, thanks, Nikki. I'll go ahead and start us off, and then Mark will kind of finish us off with some comments on the progress with litigation and what we're looking at there. To start off with, and to follow up some of the discussion that we had last meeting, we did meet on March 6th and then again on April 7th to discuss some progress and some other aspects of what we're working on. To give you an update on one of the action items was I touched upon some oversight and other aspects of reports or program reviews and inspections and those type of things. We did get some additional reports that we have posted up on the OGIS site from a member of this committee, and then also Nate Jones has taken on a continuous review of those to try and pinpoint certain trends or certain issues that come up repetitively or maybe even unique. So Nate is continuing to do that, and we hope to have a better report on some of that analysis at our next meeting. As far as an assessment of the public liaison role, we did partner with the fees committee to craft a poll, or if you want to call it a survey, but we're going to stick with poll, to go out to agencies, specifically public liaisons, but they can certainly go to FOIA professionals in their agency to answer some of these questions. But we have a rather robust, and I think we would gather a good amount of information on that role and what is going on with the public liaison, as well as what fees are going on, some of the fee aspects, and the fees committee will touch upon that. So I did want to touch upon that survey or that poll, but I did want to kind of start off with talking about that public liaison role, and I think it's only fitting that I go through a blog that was posted by OGIS now 4 years ago on the role. So it talks about back in 2007, now 8 years ago, the Open Government Act amended the FOIA. Specifically, it formalized the FOIA public liaison role within agencies, that this role will serve as a supervisory official whom requesters can raise concerns about the program or the requests that are being processed by an agency. Specifically, reducing delays, increasing transparency, understanding the status of requests, and assisting with resolutions to disputes that requesters have with agencies that they filed a FOIA request. This role serves as a listening ear for FOIA requesters and works to resolve those disputes, which is what I would kind of categorize as providing customer service. And they're really focused on how requesters are our customers. And resolving their issues, complaints, challenges that we face processing FOIA requests. And this role is something that OGIS uses to address some matters that are elevated up to OGIS. So they are partners with OGIS. And with that in mind, we wanted to go ahead and reach out to them and see how well that role is serving, who is serving in that role, and a variety of other things. So I just want to touch on a couple of the questions that we're going to ask, and this is something I believe is posted on the committee website, so you don't have to take copious notes or anything. It's going to be posted up there. But I want to touch upon some of the ones that fall under the oversight and accountability, and then the subcommittee on fees will touch upon the questions that they're going to ask. But we want to first ascertain who's serving in that role, because it's such a unique role. It is a supervisory official. It could be a lawyer, it could be a FOIA professional, it could be someone else as a collateral duty. But who is in that role? What's their grade series? How long have they served in that role? Who do they report to? Is it the chief FOIA officer, or is it someone else? Have they received public liaison training or customer service training? This is something maybe through DOJ, OIP, OGIS, or some other role. So have they received that? Do they plan to attend training? So if they haven't, but they plan to attend it over the next 12 months. Do they have sufficient resources? So do they feel that they need more personnel, more training, leadership support, technology to do a better job and overcome some challenges they may face? How often are they, on average, contacted by requesters? It's something that they interact with the public on a daily basis, or maybe it's monthly. And then what percentage of things do they resolve? Is it a status checking? What's the status of my request? Is it something to do with an appeal? Is it, I'm not satisfied with my response? And what does this mean, this exemption thing? Can you explain that to me? But what are the percentages that they're contacted? What are they answering, and what are they interfacing with the public about? Do they interact with their attorneys? Do they have attorney interaction within their agency and within their role? How often do they interact with that attorney? And then that's all for the public liaison role for the oversight and accountability. There are some questions regarding fees that I'll let them handle that. But that is something that we've put together and had worked to finalize, and we're working with OGIS to get that published out to the public liaisons or the agency FOIA professionals to get those answers. And then once we get that information, we will then analyze that and see if there are some trends or some issues or challenges that come as a result of that information. And then that's really all that I have to report as far as the work that we've done on those two aspects. And I'm going to ask Mark to talk about the litigation piece that we've been looking at as well.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
Marty, Did you guys,
Melanie.
Melanie Pastay from Justice, did you purposely not include parallel questions directed to the FOIA requester service centers? So I'm just thinking, since the liaison is the supervisory official, you know, it might be that an agency has a really robust service center and lots of data could be collected about how many times they interact with requesters and the questions they get, and only a small percentage might actually go to the liaison. So I just wondered if you were purposely only wanting to see what went up to the liaison and excluding the requester service center, or did you want to, or had you thought about covering both in the survey?
I think we generally talked about a little bit of that, not necessarily the service center by title, but I think that the different functions. We've had some other questions in here that we kind of narrowed down and replaced them with some other matters. But the way that I think the intent that we're going to flush out over the next probably couple weeks before this goes out is to add a paragraph to kind of describe what the intent of the survey is and who that goes to. I think initially we have a focus of a public liaison, but then we would put in there and try to capture it and explain it in the appropriate way of, you can go to other FOIA professionals, naturally a customer service center if you have one and it's robust, to answer these questions. And there are some comment fields in here, text boxes, that maybe that can be described a little bit better. But the initial focus was that position itself, that's titled that supervisory official that handles those matters. And then possibly, you know, they can contribute with that type of service center to answer some of those, like maybe, you know, they have certain text box where they can explain some of those things.
Well, like I'm thinking of like status inquiries. I just would imagine that lots of those would be answered by the requester service center, which might be the actual FOIA professional handling the request. And it seems like it would be helpful to gather that info.
Yeah,
that might not go up to the liaison because it might just be being handled by the.
We weren't focusing on necessarily how well the agency as a whole was gonna answer these. We were focusing on that role itself.
Okay.
I think the fees is probably a little bit more of a holistic approach,
If
but
I
we were
could-
focusing on that.
Melanie, this is Dolores Barber from DHS. When Marty and I first met and we were talking about this whole thing, when you bring up the FOIA Requester Service Center, and Marty, you mentioned the Open Government Act, we started our discussion and it was predicated upon the Executive Order 13392.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we asked ourselves was, what agencies, what departments actually have a FOIA Requester Service Center that's implemented, and they're calling it that, which led us to the FOIA Public Liaisons. Are they supervisory positions? Has anybody created any training for them? Do they function in the role that they have? Is it a specific duty for a specific person, or is it a collateral duty? So when all those questions came up, that's when we did our first draft of the poll. And what we envision is that we go out first to see what sort of information that we gather with this first pass of the poll, and then see if we can expand it out. Like Marty mentioned in terms of the text boxes, hopefully we'll be able to capture whether or not people actually have a FOIA Requester Service Center and they're calling it that, and it's established at agencies. For example, when I first came to DHS, which is huge, there was one FOIA public liaison. And I encouraged the chief FOIA officer at the time to look at Executive Order 13392. I don't think one FOIA public liaison for all of DHS would exactly serve all the customers that we get.
Right.
So we expanded that very quickly to over 20 in each of the components in some of the sub-offices, and made sure that they were supervisory positions. So once we get this first pass, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, then I think that will inform how we expand getting more information.
Because we haven't, and this is me speaking, and this is Marty again if anyone's on the phone, but we're not sure we don't see data that really supports who's in this role, what are they doing, how is it being utilized. So we thought, since this is a specific role that each agency should basically have, even if it's 1 or 13, we want to assess this role in particular. Then based on that, we could probably then start looking at some other aspects of it. So maybe there'll be a survey in the future, that says, okay, we've collected this data, this is what it looks like. Now let's get a different picture of, a greater customer service type FOIA request service center type thing.
Right. I think what happens is people conflate.
Right.
I think the terms get conflated, and because the liaison sort of sounds more like a person, we tend to think they're doing everything, but it's supposed to be that it's 2 levels.
And that's exactly what we want to assess.
Okay.
We want to see what is going on with this role, because it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Like who's in this role? Is it somebody that has a powerful role, or is it a collateral duty for somebody in this office way down here? So that's exactly what you mentioned is what we're trying to assess. Okay. So we get some hard data to say this is what's going on in the agencies, and then maybe next steps would be something along a different line based on some of this data.
If I could just add, this is Ann Weisman from Crew. From the FOIA requester's perspective, I think certainly what motivated me to push for this is the notion, anecdotally, that the FOIA liaison has not, in many agencies, proven to be a very effective position. And so our focus was very deliberate on the FOIA liaison. We are not trying with this survey to collect data across the board on how well an agency deals with the public, et cetera. So, I think the data for requesters will confirm or refute the sense we have that this isn't being an effectively utilized position in a lot of agencies, and it'll do more, as Marty. But so there's a number of perspectives that I just want to stress that go into the design of this survey.
This is Mark Zaid, and to add, because the liaison is an individual, and that individual is going to be identified. So if a requester, those of us on here are sophisticated in experience, but if someone in some Midwest state, or not to pick on the Midwest, just goes to anywhere outside of DC, how about that, looks up online who the liaison is, they can't call the public service to the FOIA service center, they're going to call or email the liaison, and we wanted to get a sense of, is that person responding back timely? And if they're responding timely, are they responding substantively? Are they responding accurately? Have they been helpful? And that was a large part of it. No reason why we can't look at the agency responses, certainly in general, to find out later. But the first focus was the first place someone's going to go to is that working.
Yeah. And maybe it's Melanie again. Maybe if there's like a preamble to your survey that lays that out, that that you're purposely looking at the liaison, and that the agency, you understand that the agency has the 2 levels, because really in theory, if you're in the Midwest, you should be able to go to the website and call first the FOIA Requester Service Center, and get a human being that's supposed to give you things like your status, and then it's if you need more that you go to the FOIA Public Liaison. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I know it sounds like that. I see now your focus really is on what happens at that next step.
Mr. Pritzker?
David Pritzker, ACUS. It seems to me that it's essential to add one more question that will ferret out how big the program is. As it happens, one of the hats I wear at ACUS is that I'm the FOIA Public Liaison. I can answer all of these questions, and you wouldn't have a clue from what I wrote that we have a minuscule FOIA number of FOIA requests. So I think you need something at least that will identify whether the program gets thousands or hundreds or dozens of requests each year.
This is actually very helpful. We will have some time, and I would love for everyone to participate. And if there's, additional questions that can be added, maybe we all could brainstorm and, come to an agreement on that.
And just one more alibi. This is Marty again. I think to complement what you and Melanie had brought up, David, I envisioned it as we collect the information, that we look at the annual reports. So to a degree, annual reports do kind of give us a little sense of how well that program's working. What are the average turnaround times, backlogs, and so forth. So by looking at that data, we can then ascertain that this agency is maybe, they process 1,000 a year versus more than 1,000 a year, or has a numerous amount of public liaisons because it says that in the report. So I think there'll be a complementary data being complemented by both sides, where we look at, this is the type of agency it is, and this is the data based on the annual reports, and then this is what we got from that individual that is interfacing with the public, hopefully very often, and can give us a sense of that interaction, rather it be extremely positive and very well rounded and has a very well established program and outreach and customer service focus, or maybe there's some challenges and we can ascertain that they don't have access to email, for example, and that's something that maybe needs to be addressed. So we're looking to probably complement a variety of different things, and then next, we can definitely use that data as a foundation and look at other things that we can certainly look at if agencies are doing well, or to help us move along to say, in a report that we may want to publish in the future, these are recommendations that complement the open government that was done 8 years ago. So in 8 years, we found this based on something that was put in place 8 years ago. So that's kind of like what we were looking at. A great question, thanks.
This is Dolores from DHS. To go to David's point, I think for the first question that we have, we can add where it asks about your position, series, and grade, we can just add what agency you're at.
Mhm.
So it'll make it easier for us
To match it
up with the annual report data. So thank you for that, David.
Yeah, this is Mark Zaid. Yeah, David, if there's anything, because we didn't, obviously being new, we didn't have anybody who was a public liaison. So one of the things that might actually be helpful, since this has not been issued, maybe we'll get the answers from you first. So we can see, and you can let us know if there's something that you think would be more meaningful to add here. We tried to keep it down to a specific number of questions so as to increase the odds of responses, which by and of itself will tell us something about public liaisons if they blow off the Federal Advisory Committee survey / poll and not answer us. I think that will be quite telling and probably be the first thing in our report as to who did not respond. And then follow up as to why they did not respond. And because particularly we want to know is, like you wear multiple hats, so is this for other agencies, is this something that was just tacked on to someone because they happen to be there that day and they don't know or care about FOIA, and people who call, are placed on the second tier? Don't know if that's true at any agencies, but that was one of the purposes for us issuing this, or about to. And then on the litigation side, there's really not much, if anything, to report. Things that we had initially decided to look at, we're still looking at, but we discovered that there are private organizations, most notably Syracuse University with TRAC, that have been independently undertaking much of the same information or efforts that we were going to do, and since we're tied to government now, we want to be efficient. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel, and we're going to try and mirror and match up with what they're doing and then fill in any gaps. And they're, from what I can tell, robustly compiling information relating to litigation efforts. So on that, we're not reinventing the wheel. So that's pretty much it on litigation. I think that's it for our subcommittee.
Do we have any questions?
I'd like to ask a different kind of question prompted by, this is David again, prompted by what Mark just said about encouraging responses. Has the committee or subcommittee, has anyone thought of how this is going to be distributed, and specifically under whose aegis? I don't know how frequently an advisory committee sends a survey of this kind out to federal agencies, and how it's done so that it encourage responses. Has anybody thought about that?
Yes.
We did. This is Mark. My understanding, and I'll defer back, is it's either gonna, or both come through that Melanie would help us, or at least identify folks if we didn't know, well, we could obviously find them, but we wanted to know if does someone have a list of everybody in one place, or do we have to go to every agency's websites to actually find out who the liaison is? I think we even suggested, and I don't know if that's ever happened, whether OGIS was going to maybe compile a list and put it online.
That's not my point.
No, how you're talking about how we
they
send
get
it to them. I think it's coming through OGIS as the primary, is it
I
not?
believe we were going to enlist Melanie's assistance for compiling a list of everyone for this particular.
We're happy to do that. I think though David is
How it's gonna get
yeah,
sent
this
out.
David is saying not really so much the addresses, but like sort of the mechanism.
No, I presume it's going to be emailed to every public liaison.
But
And then we'll do follow-up phone calls if we don't hear back.
We're happy to do it.
Krista, so the National Archives, we're going to administer the survey, and we'll probably do it using either Question Pro or Survey Monkey.
Right.
And so we expect to work closely with Melanie to ensure that we're sending it to all the FOIA public liaisons.
That's right.
And, before we can send it, we need internal approval from the National Archives Chief Operating Officer's office. That shouldn't be a lengthy process. It's just a matter of having the questions approved and providing the coup with background on what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. So that's our expected process.
Right, so what we need to do is come to an agreement with all the questions, and then once everybody has added the questions and looked at it and approved it, then we'll go to our Chief Operating Officer, and then we'll take it from there. Other questions? Anyone else? No? All right, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Marty and Mark.
Can I add one more comment?
Of course.
This is Krista again. Nate did a really good job putting together a lot of agency reviews and GAO audits and reports, and I've tried to get a lot of those up on the OGIS website by providing links to them. So if you go to ogis.archives.gov, there's a FOIA advisory committee section, and each of our 3 subcommittees has its own webpage. And if you look on the Oversight and Accountability webpage, you'll see links to a lot of GAO audits and a lot of agency reports and audits and OIP guidance and all kinds of great things. So if any of you have suggestions on resources I can add to that, or if members of the public want to write in and let us know what we should add, we're happy to do that, and we welcome your feedback and collaboration on making this a great resource.
Thank you all. So we'll now turn to Subcommittee on FOIA Fees, chaired by Ms. Ginger McCall and Jim Hogan. If I could turn to Ginger. Okay.
Hi, it's Jim Hogan here. We started, the subcommittee was formed last summer, of course, in the first meeting. And I think discussion centered upon is, at least in view of when I've talked with FOIA officers throughout the Department of Defense, it's one of the most contentious issues between FOIA requesters and FOIA professionals. The fee issue, and a lot of it is misunderstanding. Sometimes FOIA officers aren't educated exactly what's required. It's a lot of subjective decisions have to be made in a world where people want the decisions to be as objective as possible. So there's a lot of gray area, and it requires a lot of education. Case law changes. The guidelines created by OMB are from 1987, and the world has changed drastically since then. So sometimes FOIA officers are left feeling there's not enough guidance, and so they do many times what they think is right, and of course, the process of trying to adjudicate what fees may or may not be there delays, in some ways, the process of the requester getting the information that they want. So is there a way to streamline? Is there a way to improve it? We've looked at what some other countries have done. We discussed that in the last meeting here. It doesn't seem to be as much of an issue that we can tell from other countries. Mostly we're looking at Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom. I think we looked at Mexico also. So why is it such an issue here? Is it getting worse? So there's sort of two ways to get data. One would be, and we're going to talk about a survey of, to really define a problem, survey of FOIA officers, FOIA professionals, which we're going to piggyback on the survey questionnaire going out, or the poll going out from Marty's subcommittee, going to public liaisons. And Marty and I are going to talk a little bit more about, do we want the public liaisons answering this? Because many times public liaisons really don't do day-to-day FOIAs. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have no experience doing it. You know, we get an answer more from the people out in the field doing the work. What do they say the issues are? And many times the issues would be different out, you know, for example, Department of Defense out at some air base in Nevada, it'd be a different issue than we have here inside the Beltway. Different types of requesters, different types of documents being requested. And we also talked about, it'd be nice to get, you know, data from FOIA requesters. Unfortunately, we can't do that because of restrictions, you know, government, you know, surveying the public and getting data from the public. The ropes we have to go through, the hurdles we have to go through. We realize it's not a good idea. We discussed a couple possibilities, and we're going to talk to Kirsten a little bit, you know, focus groups, maybe through ASAP. We don't know if that's really possible. So we're pretty much going to be restricting our data that we are able to get from government agencies and government people. But I believe, you know, public can make comments to the committee at any time. Yes. So, you know, if they voluntarily want to give comments to the committee through the website on what they see fees are, that's fine. You know, that's good. That's something very welcome to us. So we're still looking at defining it. I do think the problem is we want to see exactly, do we take too much time? Now, granted, and Nate talks about this in our committee meetings, agree with him, is it less than 1% of the money? You know, we don't get that much money in. Yeah, and that's true. It's, the FOIA fees are, I don't know what their purpose was way back when Congress first did it, but it doesn't fund the FOIA program. It doesn't. I know in the Department of Defense, you got there where, you know, they're hitting 20% pay cuts in some places, you know, or say resource cuts. You can frustrate a commander. You know, why do we give this stuff out free and they can't get money for it? Understand that's going on. But it really, the fees do not pay for the program. You know, maybe we discover what the real purpose is it. You know, we talked about in the committee, are fees sometimes a way of seeing, helping a FOIA requester narrow the focus of the request, you know, and try to get it in a quick manner. So just some of the discussions have been very good. I can't say we come to any conclusions sometimes in our discussions. We keep going around and around in circles and sometimes say there's no easy answer here. But we're going to go out with the, you can see the questions here on the handout and the available online. Some of the questions dealing with fees. One is a flat fee. And that's something that some countries have. I think Canada has a flat fee. And also, I think you have to be Canadian citizen to ask for Canadian documents too. So we won't deal with there, of course. But a flat fee, $5 to $10 for non-commercial. We're primarily focusing on non-commercial requesters. We'd like to keep commercial requesters, keep that, not change that at all. Keep it the way it is right now. Even though at times it could be difficult. I mean, there's even been controversy whether someone is actual commercial requester or not. Mark's probably called commercial requester. Yep. And so that is rare, but sometimes maybe that's something to look at. Getting rid of fee. Maybe that's a question we need to add here. But getting rid of fee categories. I don't know if I can't remember if we addressed that because that's a subjective call. But trying to get information as much as we can from the public liaisons and see what we can do with that data. We also looked at some discussion, hypothetically, what would happen if we eliminate fees or change the fee structure? Whenever something changed, you hear this inside the Beltway, the unintended consequences of a law change. And it's Congress and, you know, passes laws, something happens, great, then there's these unintended consequences. And if we have some type of legislative proposal at the end of this committee, if we do from our subcommittee, can we foresee some of those unintended consequences? Can we negate them? You know, that's predicting the future, but we'd like to make it, I think we all on the subcommittee want a process here that's beneficial to both agencies and requesters. Get the information out there, get out there easily without being bogged down, because the more we get bogged down on issues, the greater the backlog is. And in the Department of Defense, our backlog is going up significantly, and that's some things that we are battling. So we discussed and just have a couple positive and negative issues here. Say if we eliminated fees, a positive thing was we would not be spending resources trying to adjudicate fee issues. I mean, that FOIA officer, instead of writing a letter, discussing fee issues, can just work on processing it, making sure the search is done, doing a review, responding to the requester, coordinating the reviews. Time can be spent on that. A negative, potential negative, is would it be an increase in large and complex requests where they're asking for a lot of documents? At some agencies, I think, that could be a very real issue based on the type of requesters they have. And that would increase FOIA backlogs. You know, we're trying to keep that backlog down. So is that something that's a real possibility? We don't know. We don't want to go, we don't think the charter of the subcommittee is to be looking at how we deal with these, with potentially large requests. There have been some agencies, at least some components of the Department of Defense, getting larger requests. You know, you know, we're doing emails a lot more, so you get a whole lot more documents when you grab a few thousand emails. You know, responsive to a request takes a lot longer to do. So, but we're not really going there with that. But we want to see if we can keep, you know, have maybe an end product that, to the best we can tell, would not necessarily entail that going on. I mean, it's hard to predict the future, but that's just a concern we have. Talked about flat fees or high threshold for fee requests. So we drafted, actually something I came up through a few years ago, potential legislative proposal, something I did in my spare time. And said, not that I have spare time, but something I did. How would it look like? And I sort of patterned after what the United Kingdom does, where they do have a ceiling, a fee ceiling, without going into detail on that. And so we just circulated that around and got some good comments. I don't know if anybody really likes it. The more I look at it, the more I dislike it myself in some ways, possible negative consequences from it. But right now, I would say next few months, we're going to be looking at this you know, legislative proposal. How can we tweak it? And we may not end up with anything at all. We may end up with, the best thing to do is deal with what we have and get in a good education process here. Or it might be, let's just scrap the whole thing and maybe start over. We're not sure. We're still going in that direction. But personally, to me, I've enjoyed the discussions among fellow agency officials and the ones from the requester community on the board. I'm proud to be able to represent the DoD, especially to the subcommittee, and some of the concerns I have, and I share with them some of the things we hear in the subcommittee. And hopefully, during this process, at least we can get more education out there in the field about how to deal with fees. One of the things I try to tell FOIA officers in the Department of Defense and others, don't make fees an issue when it's not an issue. And I think that's something that's going on. You know, they're sweating over issues. I say, how much search you have? Well, we have 2 hours of search. It's not an issue. Even if it's 3 hours of search, don't make it an issue, because they spend more money trying to make it an issue when it's not an issue. Yet when there's valid issues, when it really is a fee issue, and this is really concerning, and you know, how do we deal with that? How do we educate the requesters too that way? So, invite comments from any other subcommittee members, please, and or any other committee members. Thank you.
I got one. This is Mark Zaid. I don't know necessarily if it has to be a survey question, but it might be an interesting data point when we're discussing whether or not an agency should just forego an issue of fees, get rid of fees other than commercial. from a statutory standpoint, and I'd be curious to know if this can be tracked. How much by way of fees are owed to an agency by a requester who agreed to pay fees and then reneged on payment after delivery of documentation, and so what that number is, and then has an agency of the United States government ever gone after anybody for fees in that type of situation? I mean, so if we have a situation where fees are the time was spent in determining the fee category, in assessing fees, in doing all the letters, and then the person doesn't pay, and then nobody does anything by way of enforcement, then why are we even doing it in the first place? That may be a small number, it may be a medium, a large number, it may not be a number that can be tracked. I don't know at all, but if it is trackable, that might be an interesting data point to, I would imagine, probably go for the fact of it's not worth the effort of having to deal with fees, because I doubt anyone has ever been sued in the history of FOIA for collection of fees.
No, I can say in Department of Defense, I've never heard of going after, and anybody who's got a tracking system should be able to get a report, okay, who owes. Of course, that report is inaccurate. You know, it could be errors people put into the system that somebody owes fees and they really don't, or they paid and hasn't been caught up. So I don't trust those reports. When I was an action officer a number of years ago, we would have that system. I get a request, I look at it, and then I double check the file and say, this person really owes. Yes, we will do. You know, it's basically we won't honor the request. You know, you pay, and then we'll process your request. You don't pay, we won't process. But never, it's not worth it, because I would think the resources to take to go after someone more than they're going to owe anyway. So I've never done it by it.
And Jim, this is Larry.
Yes,
I
Larry.
can tell you that Treasury requires agencies, if you have a debt owed to the government, to refer to Treasury.
Right.
So Treasury
That's
does
true.
go after FOIA requesters who have
Okay.
basically bad debts.
Good.
They don't sue anybody, they just go after, I guess, their tax returns or something. So there is a process that agencies are required to, by Treasury,
Okay.
required to refer any bad debts to the Treasury for the collection.
Thank you, Larry.
This is Ginger Call. I'm the co-chair on this committee, but as I was looking at the questions and Jim was going through the history of the conversation that we had, it occurred to me that we may, several times in the conversations that we've had in the subcommittee, the issue has come up about agency processing queues, what percentage of requests agencies receive, or complex requests or voluminous requests. That may be something that we'd want to get to in this survey, since it has come up a lot in the conversations that we've had around the FOIA fees issue.
Okay.
This is Dolores Barber from DHS. In thinking about the issue of fees, and when you were giving your report, Jim, about restrictions in obtaining information from the requesters, I think when it comes to fees that, because we have to charge fees, Melanie will tell us, that it would be useful to at least attempt or think about the feasibility of collecting information from the requester community. Even though there are information collection restrictions, they're not too formidable. And this committee might think about coming together and maybe coming up with the information collection, going through the OMB process, and talking to the requester community. Because the one thing that jumps out to me about this survey, because we're going to send it to the FOIA public liaisons, is that, what do we do with the data once we get it? You know, because I think anecdotally, just if we fill this out, if we all put ourselves in the shoes of a FOIA public liaison and filled out this survey about fees, we could pretty much guess what the outcome is going to be. And I think it would be useful to expand it out, to actually maybe think about doing the work to create a real survey instrument and send it out to the requester community and drill down and figure out just exactly what is going on with fees. I like the idea of the compare and contrast with other countries. However, the United States of America is the biggest FOIA game in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you talk about Canada, you talk about flat fees, and you talk about fee limitations, it's different in the UK than it would ever be in the United States of America. And I think it would be worthwhile for this committee to at least think about reaching out to the requester community on the issue of fees and actually doing a real survey.
I appreciate that, Dolores. Thank you very much. Because I think we talked to Krista, a lot of this, maybe I'm just giving my impression, I remember, is that the time to take to do the survey. You want to address that, Krista, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the process of collecting information from the public. It just has that added hurdle of having to go through OMB. So we have to go through NARA internally first and then go through OMB. We're happy to do that if that's what the committee wants us to do. I think part of the thinking was this committee, you know, the 2-year committee at this point, and so I think wanting to move quickly, I think the idea was first that we'll, you know, go for the low-hanging fruit, and then at the same time, you know, let's work on some survey questions for the public if that's what we want to look at. I think there are definitely information gaps out there that it would be great for us to fill in.
And we're happy to do that if you all could come up with the
Yeah, tell us
questions.
what you want,
And then
support
we'll
you.
start the
Okay.
process.
This is, if I could just speak up, this is Ann. I think it might be worth also checking with TRAC to
On
see
these.
if they have done anything on this issue. I don't know if they have, but they collect a lot of data, so it might be a good starting point. And also, they might have some good ideas on how to go about collecting that kind of data. Because I agree with Dolores that I think it would be an extremely useful piece of this
That's true.
to get that perspective. or
This
input.
is Dave Barr, and since I guess the hat I wear here is representing the requester community, I can say anecdotally, without benefit of actual hard data, that a lot of my clients, when they come to me, and I'll start talking to them in my due diligence about other requests that they've had, or even the history of the requests that bringing them to me, frequently they'll get a fee assessment of $500 or $300 or even $100, and that often is enough for them to say, well, all right, I guess we can't afford this, and then that request grinds to a halt. Often unsophisticated FOIA requesters aren't privy to the concept of a fee waiver or an administrative appeal, or it seems too daunting. And so even though they have rights guaranteed by the system, they don't take part of that. They don't exercise those rights. And they come to me, and then I say, well, here's what we can do. But often we have to hit the reset button and start the whole request process over because the appeal deadline has lapsed or something like that. So I can say that, obviously for the information professionals in this room, people who do FOIA requests, hundreds of FOIA requests a year, this is a no-brainer. We know how to formulate our, we're describing our requester category, we're laying all the groundwork for the fee waiver, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a vast, the public, the body politic, the public out there who's supposed to be using this without lawyers. This is not supposed to be requiring lawyers to make a FOIA request. It's very intimidating. And if you're seeking information for your grassroots group that has an annual budget of $5,000 a year, and they say, well, here, you can have it for $200, that just shuts the whole thing down. And so, yes, it'd be great. And when I was the one who suggested that we try and explore the idea of waiving fees in their entirety for non-commercial requesters, one of the things I wanted to do was, part of this polling process was to seek this information for the public. But then I learned all the hurdles that we'd have to jump over and the hoops we'd have to jump through. And I do think we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And so we want to get the information, at least some information, sooner rather than later. And so that's why we're going through this more narrowly focused approach.
Nate Jones, National Security Archive. Thanks, Dave. Two, just kind of one point that I want to get on for the record, and one general question. The question is, are agencies really required to charge fees? Because I remember going through FOIA regulations a while back, or just I'd like to see the genesis of that. And some agencies, I can find it, I think off the top of my head, it's actually the CIA has a line in their regs saying when it's in the agency's interest, we can waive fees at any time, and they generally do that, and I think it has worked very well. And then the other point is something that we've got to figure out or clarify or make known is that if according to the updated law, if an agency misses its 20-day, or in my opinion, sometimes 30-day deadline for FOIA, for non-commercial requesters, other than reproduction fees, they cannot be charged. So there's a huge universe of requests where agencies are saying this will cost literally $1.4 million to process this request, but the fact of the matter is the agency would probably, in all likelihood, would have missed their deadline and not be able to charge most of those fees anyways. So that's an important aspect of the fee conundrum I wanted to get on the record. Thanks.
David Pritzker, ACUS. I haven't looked at the report to us that I've mentioned in prior meetings recently. I haven't looked recently, but I think there's some data in that about fees, and I'll check into it and let you know whether there's anything that fits in with this conversation. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that there have been comments about the hurdles getting a survey to the general public, to the requester community, approved by NARA, getting it approved by OIRA. I've done that too. I spent some time as a desk officer at OIRA. In addition to persuading the folks there, the law, the Paperwork Reduction Act requires no fewer than 2 public comment periods about your proposed inquiry, 60 days for the first and 30 days for the second. So if there's any hope of getting this information in the near future, this isn't the way to do it.
Nate Jones again. I would just add to that, my hope is that in general, the FOIA, I noticed we're halfway through our 2-year term, halfway through our session, and we spent a lot of time talking about surveys, not a lot about actual reform. So I would just second that more than jumping through hoops to do surveys and collect information, which is very important. I want to state, and I think most of my colleagues want to go beyond that as well. So thanks.
Hi, this is Marty. Can I take a moment? Just on 2 points. One is the collecting from delinquency. I know my agency, they're working through a process now to actually come up with a policy where we can, if you want to call it, go after or collect delinquent fees, as well as that's actually a sub-portion of a bigger collection effort where we go and collect basically from employees if they're overpaid in travel and things like that. But I had put in a piece on collecting FOIA fees. That policy is now going on about a year. So it's not an easy thing to do. And that also fits in with what Larry brought up about Treasury. At what point do we refer? At what point do we waive it because it just takes too much effort? But we've been working on that for a year, and in my mind, I don't know why it takes a year to do that, but it's taking a year and it's hard work to get all those things lined up. Which leads me into my second point, trying to understand, other than it's hard work, to change the fee guidance after 30 years. And speaking as an agency, we're now, our regulation for FOIA, as well as basically information disclosure and confidential supervisory information, it's all in one regulation. It's 3 years old and we're rewriting it. And one of the things that I wanted to do was get away from the OMB guidance as well as the guidance basically in everybody's regulation. So I crafted thresholds, or I wanted to craft thresholds. So if it's below $500, it's automatically waived. I don't have to do anything. It's automatically waived, or collect X amount up front, or structure that so it really supports common sense. And my legal team said you can't do that because you have to follow OMB guidance, and it restricts you to do that. So again, I go back to not understanding why after almost 30 years, why that hasn't changed. Because even whenever agencies like mine wants to set thresholds and do things in a more constructive and positive manner, those regulations then restrict you from doing it. And essentially I have to write in my administrative record, I'm waiving this fee, I'm waiving this fee, and I'm waiving this fee, versus having a very strict approach saying I'm automatically waiving these because we won't collect anything unless it's above $500. So just from a different perspective, I've tried to do that in my guidance and my regulations, and it's now more of a hindrance to even do that.
Well, it would be a terrific tangible benefit, Nate Jones, if the FOIA Advisory Committee could make it so that agencies that want to improve their fee structure are not handcuffed.
So
But
that could be
this is,
recommended.
Ann, that leads me to a suggestion of adding a question to the survey that gets at the issue of, you know, are there I don't know how to phrase it, but basically the question of whether there are internal prohibitions or bars on your discretion with respect to fees. Because I'm really curious how many agencies believe they have the discretion and what they understand, you know, are obstacles. So I would suggest that you consider adding that as a question.
This is Mark Zaid. I know when we were pulling together these poll survey questions, we were combining the two subcommittees to make it more efficient. But I'm wondering, is the public liaison really the right person to answer these fee questions?
Oh, that's something Marty and I were talking about before the meeting started. And it may be no. A public liaison, in some cases, and I'm thinking of all the ones we have in DOD, not as many as Dolores has, we only have about 16. But I'm thinking some of them, no. Some of them, yes. So we would ask them to give it to their, you know, have a FOIA professional answer this question, someone who deals with this. But then again, for example, you know, you have the, say, the Department of the Army, who has a FOIA public liaison, you know, here in Fairfax County, but then they have hundreds of people around the world who better answer the questions. So, you know, maybe we have to look at restructuring it, you know, till we will get it out to the field where a person, you know, out in South Korea or, you know, in Kansas have a better way to answer it than someone here. Something we have to rethink. That's a good
Who
question.
from the agency folks, and maybe Melanie, you might be able to add in who within an agency has authority to decide what the fee policy is going to be in that agency?
Well,
I mean,
the fee policy
Well,
would
the
be in the
policy's
regulations.
the regs, the
Well-
policy's the reg, but the actual implementation day to day, as Jim is saying, is gonna be the FOIA professional. You know, they're implementing it. One thing that, just to throw this in, as we're just having this discussion, and one thing I'm thinking is, we know the one stat that we have from every agency's annual FOIA report is that the tiny little percentage of money that gets collected in fees, which shows you, but I'm thinking that maybe we could ask more specifically. My take from that tiny little percentage that is collected is that fees, as a practical matter, are assessed in a very small percentage of cases because we have such a small amount of money coming in. It would be good, I think, to find out, to just add a question, what percentage of requests involve assessment of fees? Like, let's see, like, sort of out of the 700,000 requests we have across the government, how many of those requests are people wrestling with a fee determination? I think that would be a really good statistic for us to have.
Yeah. And I think one other thing that sort of comes to my mind is, at what point does the agency issue its fee letter? Is it after it has done the search, or after it has contacted the program office to figure out the volume
And
of
it should-
records?
I mean, it should vary, Melanie again.
Right.
I mean, one thing that I forget, somebody made this comment about before, and one thing that we're always trying to stress to agencies is that don't wrestle with a fee waiver determination until you find out if you're even gonna have fees to assess. Because it might be that your search is under the threshold, or under 2 hours, or your fee is under the threshold, and it might undo it.
Yeah, this is
So it
Ann.
just-
I think that's a good point though, Nikki, because I do think, in my experience, there are some agencies that reflexively decided at the outset. It's
Yeah,
just,
that's
and
just-
others that will wait. So that might be, again, useful information to get.
This is Dave Barr, and I will say that from personal experience, agencies not only will say the fee assessment / fee waiver issue has to be decided up front, but by the way, we're tolling our response deadline until we figure it out. You know, regardless of what the FOIA text says, that's the standard practice in some agencies. That's what we've seen.
This is Mark Zaid. I can think of instances, and I remember having to then write to the agency and say, you know what, fine, give me the 2 hours.
Yeah.
Just do that, and then you want to stop at 2 hours, go right ahead. So that's definitely been an issue at times at some agencies.
Because I think the statutory entitlements, the 2 hours and the 100 free pages for non-commercial, the idea behind that was to give everybody a base, that everybody, regardless of their financial, the association that doesn't have that much money, that everybody gets something from an agency, as long as they're non-commercial, they should get something from this, the statutory.
Well, then maybe
entitlement.
add, and this is Mark, I mean, this may be a very small number, so I don't know if it's worth adding, but given that we've had some experiences, I'd be curious to know whether agencies, when they are assessing fees from the outset before they're doing a search, are they at least undertaking that free 2-hour search? I'm going to anecdotally say no. That they're just pushing it to the requester and say, nope, here's the fees, and we're not going to do anything until you agree to pay 25% or whatever percentage that they might have set, which to me would be contrary to what the statute's requiring.
And that's a good point. That's Jim Hogan again here. But sometimes that's an education issue, but it's also it's you know, case by case. If you have a component out there that has pretty much knows everything they have, you know, like a military installation, you know, a contract, of course there's a commercial, but other things, you know, a police report or something like that, it's easy to do. But when you have we really don't know what there is. Sometimes 2 hours of search will turn up a couple things. Sometimes it'll turn up, you know, a whole universe of stuff. But yeah, I agree. Do the 2 hours at least.
But Jim, I don't mean to say, it might be that you can tell from the face of the request that the 2 hours is only a drop in the bucket and that it will be bigger. It is true. I mean, fees are definitely case by case.
But I encourage people, do the 2 hours, see what you have, and do the 2 hours at a place where, not where you think they're not going to have documents, where you think the most significant documents are. You may have 5 locations you're thinking of. Get the 2 hours or something, get some substance there, and see what you get. And a lot of times, FOIA requesters are happy with what you have, you know, and understanding. It comes down to a lot of times communication, quality communication between the FOIA officers and the FOIA requesters. I'm hearing though sometimes that itself takes away time from processing requests, but I try to encourage people, you still have to do it. It's very important. In the long run, it pays off for both, and keep that communication open, and you know, let them know, you know, if it's a large request, what it really is, and help them focus on getting what they want, talk to them what they want.
Could I go back, this
Please.
is Ann, to a point that Mark raised, that we at least we give some thought to, or the subcommittee gives some thought to, and that is separating out this survey. Because I'm not sure that it belongs with the other. I'm not sure that we'll get as robust a response if it's included with the other. And I think it's at least worth considering. Except I know that the goal was to avoid having too many surveys, but I think that will limit the value of the responses if we include
No,
it.
that's a good point. This is Mark, because I mean, you know, I don't think we had thought about this. As I think about some of these fee issues and asking, you know, is the liaison the appropriate person? They're not going to know it. They're going to have to go do some research, whereas the questions that we were asking from our subcommittee, they should be able to answer right off the top of their head in a 5-minute time span, if not less. And I'd hate we didn't get answers to the first 9 questions because they felt it was a daunting task to ask the next 6, 7 questions, which we want them to answer or somebody to answer too. So we probably do need to separate it.
This is Dolores Barber from DHS. I agree that it should be separate. Here's my recommendation. If you sent the fee poll to the chief FOIA officers, at least this is how it would act. This is how it would happen at DHS. If you send it to the chief FOIA officers, the chief FOIA officers will send it to their staff.
To the entire
To
FOIA
to their
professionals.
Yeah. Is that true at DOD, Jim?
Exactly. I was thinking. I think it'd probably be better, more efficient to do it to the public liaisons and from there down to the FOIA requester service centers. But either.
The thing is, with the FOIA public liaison, that's one of the things we're trying to suss out from that survey, whether or not there are FOIA requester service centers in all the departments and agencies.
Yeah, I'm just thinking department offensive.
But if you send it to the chief FOIA officer at DHS, it would get to all of the FOIA processors, this fee survey.
It would work the same way.
Which means we'd get a more robust response, which we're clearly all in favor of, right? Core data is good. Is there I'm just not hearing any good reason not to do that.
So I think what we're going to do with this seems like we're going to separate from the other committee and add some questions in here we've discussed, add a separate question survey and for the public and that'll probably be the first priority because that'll take longer. Circulate around, and hopefully get something to you within a few weeks on that. And the other one go to, and maybe give, chief FOIA officers or public liaisons. We can go to chief FOIA officers. I just hope that doesn't, and some agencies I could slow it down. But I would think not. We'll go to chief FOIA liaison.
I mean, I'm here, this is Melanie again,
Yeah.
I know, I feel like I know what you're thinking of, Jim. I wonder if it's I mean, every FOIA office has the actual FOIA office has, I hate to say chief again, but a lot of times that's the name that it's called, sort of the principal FOIA officer for each component or each agency. That might be a more direct spot to send the fee one to, the fee survey to.
Kind of like what, this is Dolores, what OIP does when they send out meeting requests. They go to the chief FOIA officers, and eventually it comes to me and trickles down.
The only issue is, Larry, if you go to that level, you may end up having to go back up to that level, and therefore you may slow down the response time. Because if you go into the political appointee, at least at EPA, and it trickles its way down, it's going to have to trickle its way back up to that political appointee because you're asking that individual for a response, which could take.
Unless they do the online responses like a Survey Monkey. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I read in chat too.
A political appointee going into a Survey Monkey and filling it out.
Well, no, telling political appointees, telling the FOIA officers down to lower level.
But
I know what you mean.
you're saying, don't go to the chief
Don't
FOIA
go to the
officer,
chief,
go to the working level, the principal, what we call it, the principal FOIA contact, who works in FOIA every day at the agency or the component of the agency.
I just think you'll get a quicker.
I think that's more practical.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that would be the FOIA public liaison.
In many cases.
But not
it is,
always.
But
No,
not always.
that's
Not
correct.
always.
No.
But
So
I
we
think
definitely-
Justice maintains lists like this.
We definitely have the,
So all the ones from FOIA.gov.
yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. That'd be
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, it's right on FOIA.gov, yeah, exactly.
In Genesis, Larry, if you're going to the public, I mean, I can tell you, we've done ICRs, and you may not get your responses till after the committee's 2 years are up, because it's going to take you a minimum 4 to 6 months.
Yes, that's correct.
At a minimum, if everything goes perfectly, all the stars are aligned, it's going to take you 6 months, realistically.
That's why I'm encouraging people who are watching this or listening to tell the committee, here's what we think.
So wait, the FOIA advisory committee disbands in a
2
year?
years, yeah.
Oh, and then it's no more?
It could be renewed.
It can be renewed.
Oh, okay.
It was established for a
Two-year
second.
lifespan.
So there needs to be a report at the end of 2 years, and if you're going to get your survey results 22 months into a 24-month,
I see.
what value is it?
This is Ann again on the issue of getting public input. I still believe it's important, but I think the process that going through the government is so clunky that it would delay anything meaningfully.
Pardon the interruption.
That said, those of us on the committee who are requesters and who are plugged into networks of requesters certainly could get some anecdotal evidence, and I recognize it would be anecdotal, but it still, I think, could be useful.
That's a good point, Ann. This is Dolores. We could also consider partnering up with ASAP.
Right.
And they might be interested
Right.
in doing something like this.
Yeah, my organization did a survey. We used ASAP. They sent it out. We did a survey a number of years ago. We were trying to assess certain things about the FOIA. And we approached ASAP. They have a policy. They will do it, generally. And it was sent out under the auspices of ASAP. It was a Survey Monkey survey that went to, I think, everybody in their database. So that's actually a pretty streamlined process. Now, a lot of those people are agency people as well, but it does include requesters. So that's a good suggestion.
And I believe we sort of entertained this idea or checked about using ASAP. And I think there was some limitation on the FOIA advisory, but allow us to check, we'll check with our general counsel's office.
But I think that's a fair point, this is Ann, but I would just say if the committee formally can't do it, I don't know that it necessarily stops some of us from trying in other ways, because the goal here is to get as much data as possible. And we recognize that the committee functions under certain strictures that make some of this difficult.
Well, and this is Mark. I mean, that's the issue. I imagine from a legal standpoint, and Gary Stern can, and whoever else in the office of OGC for NARA can look into it, but it'd be in the same way of the police using the public as an agent to go do things. So if we can't do it as an advisory committee by going through whatever all the hurdles that the others have said, we couldn't just say, hey, ASAP, do it. But you and I, Ann,
Right, exactly.
as our individuals, can do that in our spare time and just happen to
Which I have some.
push the information or hand over the information to the committee.
Or submit it to the committee through the public engagement
Right.
process.
Right, so there are ways.
Great, thank you. So why don't we take a 15-minute break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the proactive disclosure.
So 11:35, please do that.
So bathrooms are
Restrooms are 2 levels below, also coffee is down there, if you're down there.
Yes, ma'am. You were at what,